Most of what we think of as history, all the empires, the big ideas, the books, that's really just the last few pages of a much, much longer story. Today, we're diving into the prequel, the truly epic tale of how we became, well, us, long before anyone was around to write it down. To really wrap your head around it, think of it this way. If the entire 200,000-year story of our species, Homo sapiens, was squished into a single 24-hour day, all of recorded history would happen in just the last few minutes before midnight. So, what we're talking about today is the other 97% of our time on Earth, that huge, mysterious, and absolutely crucial part of our story.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Act 1 of our story is all about how our species first appeared, stepping onto a world stage where, as it turns out, we were not the only humans around. Now this is what I find so fascinating. It just completely shatters that old idea of a straight line of human evolution. For almost all of our time on Earth, we share the planet. The Denisovans and Neanderthals were already out there when we, Homo sapiens, showed up about 300,000 years ago. And we didn't just ignore each other. We coexisted, we competed, and yeah, we even interbred. For tens of thousands of years, being human meant having cousins.
But what kicked this whole process off, millions of years earlier? This right here, bipedalism. It sounds so simple, right? Just standing up and walking on 2 feet? But that was the absolute game changer. It freed up our hands to carry stuff, to signal to each other, and most importantly, to start making tools. This one adaptation laid the groundwork for literally everything that followed.
So, that brings us to our next chapter, survival. For a massive stretch of time, over 150,000 years, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers in what we call the Old Stone Age. But they were doing more than just getting by. They were innovating, creating a whole toolkit of technologies and ideas that let them actually thrive.
And you can see that innovation so clearly right here. It's like you can watch the human brain getting more complex just by looking at the stones. We start with these really simple, almost brute force Oldowan tools. A million years later, you get the much more elegant, all-purpose Acheulean hand axe. Then, later on, we're making these sharp, efficient blades. And finally, these tiny, incredibly precise microliths that could be put together to make complex things like arrows. Every single step is a huge leap in how we think.
And right alongside tools, there was another piece of tech that completely changed our world: fire. Getting control of fire, which we know they had at least 400,000 years ago, was revolutionary. I mean, it wasn't just about staying warm. It was safety from predators. It was cooking, which unlocked way more nutrients in food. But maybe the biggest deal of all, the hearth, the campfire, it became the first living room. It was the center of social life, where people told stories and bonded as a community.
But all this progress wasn't just about the physical world. Something absolutely incredible was happening inside our heads, a full-on explosion of symbolic thought. You can see it in the breathtaking cave art at Lascaux and Altamira, or in these little carved Venus figurines that might have been about fertility. We've even found seashell beads from 82,000 years ago, which suggests people were already thinking about personal identity. This was the birth of art, of myth, of culture itself.
So for nearly 200,000 years, humanity lived this mobile, hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And then, everything changed. We are now at the single most dramatic, most consequential turning point in the entire human story.
They call it the Neolithic Revolution. Around 12,000 years ago, in places like the Fertile Crescent, some groups of people just stopped. They stopped chasing their food and started growing it. And this one shift, from a nomadic life to a settled agricultural one, would completely rewrite our relationship with the planet.
And this slide really lays it all out. Just look at the difference. Life went from being constantly on the move to staying in one place. From tiny, close-knit bands to much larger villages. Your diet went from incredibly varied to relying on just a few crops. And, this is a big one, you go from a world where you own very little to a world where owning land and having extra food is everything. This wasn't just changing what you ate, it was changing, well, everything.
Now this revolution had huge immediate consequences. As people started putting down roots, the very first towns popped up. But with the birth of towns came a whole new set of complicated and honestly very modern-sounding problems.
Take Jericho, for instance, one of the oldest settlements we've ever found. Way back around 8000 BCE, the people there built this massive stone wall and a tower. And you have to ask, why? Well, because for the first time they had stuff to protect. Stored grain, permanent houses, a fixed address. That wall isn't just a feat of engineering, it's a monument to a brand new human anxiety.
And then you have this unbelievable place, Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, a huge proto-city with thousands of people. But it was built like a honeycomb. There were no streets. Can you imagine? People walked around on the rooftops and climbed down ladders to get into their houses. And for a while, it seems like it was a pretty equal society, but living packed in that tightly, it created a whole new set of pressures.
Which brings us to a really interesting puzzle. We tend to think of farming and cities as this straight line of progress, right? It was inevitable. But the archaeology tells a different story. A lot of these earliest towns, including Çatalhöyük, were eventually just abandoned. So the question is, why?
Well, it's because this revolution came with a hefty price tag. Living in one spot meant you used up all the local resources. Packing people together created the perfect breeding ground for diseases. Storing extra food led to social inequality. Suddenly, some people had a lot more than others. And as the population grew, fights over land and water became a real problem. The dream of a settled life had a pretty serious dark side.
So after this incredible 200,000-year journey, what's the big takeaway? It's at the foundations of our world today, all of its amazing achievements and all of its deep-seated problems were laid long, long before anyone started writing history books.
At the end of the day, the Neolithic Revolution, with all of its pros and cons, created the blueprint for the world we live in now. Because you had extra food, some people could stop farming and become potters, or priests, or leaders. This led straight to social classes, to different jobs, and eventually to the huge networks of trade and government that we call civilization.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. 12,000 years ago, a shift in technology, farming, completely changed our relationship with the planet and with each other. Right now, we are living through technological shifts that are just as massive. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's our revolution? What new world are we building for the future right now?